Dino Bidala Show on Sirius XM channel 127. Today's Tuesday, March 23rd. Obviously, the big story of the day is something that broke last night through today is the horrific shooting of 10 people in Boulder, Colorado. We learned the identity of the gunman today, and he's a Syrian immigrant, came here as a child. He's Muslim American, which, of course, on the right makes them very happy because a Muslim man did it. Oblivious to the fact that last week a devout Christian man who perverted his own faith and thought killing women because they were causing temptation was appropriate. In any event, there's no need to talk about the BS we're seeing from the right. The reality is the gunman in Boulder had a criminal conviction, was known to police for another criminal mischief. It wasn't a crime, but another criminal mischief incident, but had one conviction of assault. His family talked about him having mental illness, yet last week he was legally able to buy a gun it's a pistol, but it looks like an AR. It's a Ruger AR-556. So it looks like a rifle, but technically, from what I read, it's a pistol. In any event, it's a very deadly weapon, very popular weapon. He was able to legally buy it, besides criminal conviction, and his family talking about him having some mental illness, and even those on the right saying he was an ISIS sympathizer. Well, there's no proof of that. But by them saying that, and they don't get it, they're not the brightest, they're actually making the case to help us, saying people should not be able to buy AR-15s this easily. In fact, they should be banned. But no matter what, and I think the question is, how many more Americans have to die for the GOP to actually care? How many more? Maybe the GOP can give us a number. Tell us, because every day in America, over 100 Americans are killed by gun violence. Some suicide, others being murdered. Every day, over 100. Today, over 100. Tomorrow, over 100 will die. And of that, heartbreakingly, 5 are children between infants and 17. Every single day. But the GOP, they're the pro-life party. Ha! I thought that meant like caring about life. No, it doesn't. We know the GOP pro-life means pro-oppression of women, like we just saw in Arkansas, where they passed a law banning abortion in all cases, except for the life of the mother, meaning a woman who is raped's got to carry the rapist's baby to term, and anyone who tries to help her abort the baby is committed a felony. That's their idea of pro-life. What is the GOP really about? It's not saving lives. In fact, the GOP is going through an identity crisis in post-Trump world, but two things are consistent. One is always opposing laws to save lives from guns, and second, demonizing brown and black people as much as possible. And literally in the last few weeks, while every day 100 Americans are dying by gun violence, that we just had a mass shooting last week. What have the GOP been talking about the last few weeks? The surge at the border. And not in terms of it's a humanitarian crisis, but that's a security crisis. And they were ginning up fears. Kevin McCarthy, the GOP leader, went down to the border and said people on the terror watch list were sneaking over the border, of course, intertwining their two favorite targets, immigrants and Muslims. There was no evidence to back that up. Even recent reporting doesn't really back up what he said. We had the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, saying that these migrants are coming in and they've got disease, they've got COVID, not backed up by truth, but again, playing on one of the worst bigoted tropes against immigrants, that they're disease. So the GOP is talking about that phantom menace they created, but the very real menace of over 100 Americans dying today, tomorrow, without mass shootings every day. And 2020 was horrific, partly because of the COVID closures they said talked about it, partly because of the protests in the streets. And you had some right-wing activists go out there and kill people. That 2020, we saw nearly a 20% uptick in that year alone in terms of death by guns. Mass shootings, which are 4 or more people being shot or killed, we had over 600. Again, a huge uptick last year. Again, if the GOP actually cared about lives, if they were truly pro-life, they'd be talking about doing something about this. They will do everything not to talk about it. They'd rather talk the scary children who want asylum. And in their view, oh my gosh, these kids are coming in. What are they going to do? One day they might vote. To never talking about the gun issue. They might pivot to terrorism. When I found out the name of the man in Boulder was an Arab name and found out he was Muslim, I assumed the GOP would pivot to terrorism, but the problem for them is he used the gun. If he'd used a bomb, they'd be talking about it all day. But because he used the gun, they know the realities. If they talk about his easy access to legally buy a gun, a man who should never had it, it's going to make the argument better for us. Here's the reality. In the last 3 weeks, this GOP, this pro-life party, had a chance to show they were pro-life by voting on legislation that actually would save lives. Legislation that is overwhelmingly popular. Even their own base supports one of these measures, a solid majority. Just 2 weeks ago, you had the two bills come to the House. One was universal background checks, which is essentially closing what's known as the gun show loophole. Just technically, quickly, the only time they have to do a background check under federal law is if the person selling you the gun is a federally licensed gun dealer. If they're not a licensed gun dealer, they don't have to do a background check. We're talking about 30 or 40% of the guns in this country are not sold through federally licensed gun dealers, through private transactions. This bill would close that gap, meaning everyone has a background check, because under federal law, if you have a criminal conviction of certain crimes or you've been institutionalized, you can't have a gun. It's illegal. Well, you would think Republicans, pro-life, would want to make sure people who shouldn't have a gun don't have a gun. But nope, they opposed it. Only 8 Republicans out of 211 voted for this measure that has a 90% approval rating. They also voted against closing the Charlestown loophole. The Charlestown loophole is simply this. If you have to get a background check, the government's got 3 days to give the information back to the seller. If they don't give them the information, the 4th day, the gun dealer can legally sell the gun. Dylan Roof, the white supremacist, was able to get his gun through what's known as the Charlestown loophole now and go to the Mother Emanuel Church and slaughter African Americans in an effort to start a race war. He legally bought a gun he should have never been able to get. So this would close that loophole, saying if you don't have the information from the government, you can't sell the gun until you get it, and giving 5 days. How many Republicans voted for that common sense measure? 2 out of 211. And just last week, the day after the horrific shooting in Atlanta, where 7 women were slaughtered by a right-wing man whose perversion of his own faith made him believe that he was racked with guilt and these women are a sign of temptation, so he had to kill them. This was obviously a 100% hate crime against women. The next day, there was a vote to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. 172 Republicans voted against it. Why? Because in there's a provision to make it harder for boyfriends who are convicted, not accused, convicted in a court of stalking or domestic abuse or have a restraining order against them from being able to get a gun. That's the law now if you're a husband or an ex-husband. But this boyfriend loophole means boyfriends and ex-boyfriends who are literally convicted of stalking can say they get convicted. Next thing they go out and buy a gun, they'd legally be able to do that. That's ridiculous. They should not be. And they were trying to close this loophole. And think about it this way, 3 to 4 women every day in this country are killed, and the primary way they are killed is by gun violence. This is saving lives. But nope, the GOP, the party of pro-life, voted against it. The GOP is not about pro-life. The GOP is about oppression of women and allegiance to the NRA and sacrificing American lives at all costs. It doesn't even make sense. I'm not even kidding. It makes no sense. Why, as a party, would you not care about human life? I mean, what is so deeply wrong with them as human beings to have no compassion? So the same thing with COVID. They didn't care that Americans were dying daily. The GOP is devoid of a soul as a party right now. The elected officials, the rank and file is on board with closing these loopholes. I mean, that's what's remarkable. You have a disconnect between the GOP elite, these wealthy millionaires in Congress, and the rank and file, who are vastly different people, who want to close a loophole, who want to close both loopholes, who are in favor of the Violence Against Women Act, the GOP elite, because they got to get their funding from gun manufacturers, and the NRA and lobbyists like that have turned their back on even their own base. So we'll talk about that more on the show today. We'll also probe the question of why are all these mass shooters men? Women are not shooting people. So what's the connection between being a man and lashing out against others and slaughtering them? Talk about that more on my show. It's 6 to 9 p.m. on channel 127 on SiriusXM. Again, if you don't subscribe to SiriusXM, go to the website. There's free trials. Check it out. Then call my show. Be a part of our family. We've got so much work to do. If you want progress, stay active. Thanks for tuning into the preview of tonight's Dino O'Donnell Show.